The wrapping paper made a soft crinkle as Leo pulled at the ribbon, his small hands trembling with excitement. The silver foil shimmered under the living room lights, and for a moment, just a moment, there was magic in the air. He looked up at me and whispered, "Do you think Grandpa will like what I drew for him?" I nodded, though my stomach was a tight knot of nerves. The whole room had fallen silent. My father, Raymond, leaned back in his leather chair with a glass of scotch in one hand, his face unreadable. My mother, Helen, sat on the edge of the couch like she didn't quite want to be part of this moment. My cousin Cassidy was glued to her phone. Leo lifted the lid from the perfect box. I watched his smile hesitate. He reached inside, nothing. He shook the box gently. Still nothing. "Is it empty?" he asked, voice barely a breath. My father's chuckle cut through the silence like a blade. "You thought there'd be something in there? Life doesn't reward you just for showing up, kid." Cassidy snorted. "Guess he takes after his mom. Always expecting things for free." I didn't move. Couldn't move. Rage twisted in my chest, but shame and old habits kept me anchored to the floor. Leo looked back down at the box, blinking quickly. Then he smiled again. This one was different, fragile, but brave. He closed the box, sat up straighter, and said, "That's okay. I have something for you too, Grandpa. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Raymond arched an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh? And what's that?" Leo reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, creased carefully down the middle. It was a bit bent at the corners, and I remembered how he'd held it all the way from the city, refusing to let me pack it with the other gifts. He walked across the room, clutching it in both hands like it was sacred, and stopped in front of my father. "It's a drawing," he said. "I made it just for you." Raymond glanced at me, smirked, and took the paper with 2 fingers, as if it might stain him. "Let me guess," he muttered, "a snowman with a crooked hat?" He opened the drawing lazily, almost mockingly. But something shifted. His eyes paused. His jaw didn't move, but his mouth softened. For a man who built his life on always appearing unmoved, this was different. He didn't speak. Cassidy leaned in, annoyed. "What is it? You gonna cry or something?" Raymond ignored her. He folded the paper slowly, precisely, and placed it beside his scotch. Then, without a word, he stood up and walked out of the room. Leo turned to me, blinking in confusion. Did I do something wrong? I knelt down and hugged him tight. "No, baby. You did something very, very brave." The rest of the day passed in an uneasy quiet. Raymond didn't come back downstairs. No one spoke about what had happened. Helen busied herself with dishes that didn't need cleaning. Cassidy left early, complaining of boredom. That night, as Leo slept curled against me in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the look on my father's face. Not anger. Not ridicule. For once, maybe regret. Or maybe memory. And I realized, my son had done something I never could. He cracked open a man I had long since labeled as unbreakable. And he'd done it with a crayon drawing. We left early the next morning. No one said goodbye. Helen stood by the sink, scrubbing a perfectly clean glass. Cassidy's car was already gone. Raymond's door remained shut. Leo waved toward the house anyway. "Maybe next time, Grandpa will want to hang out," he said, still hopeful. I didn't answer. I didn't want to crush him with my truth. I just fastened his seatbelt, closed the car door gently, and drove us away. The silence in the car was soft. Not heavy, just thoughtful. Leo stared out the window, his sketchbook resting on his lap. 3 days passed. Then, on the 4th morning, I opened our front door and froze. A small box sat neatly on the porch. No note, no return address. Just a plain wooden music box with tiny hand-carved roses along the edges. It looked old. Loved. The kind of thing someone had held on to for years. I brought it inside, placed it on the table, and called for Leo. He came running, eyes wide. Did someone send me something? He opened the lid carefully. A gentle melody spilled into the room, soft, nostalgic. Somewhere over the rainbow. Tucked inside was a folded scrap of paper. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. 3 short lines. To the bravest little boy I know. Thank you for remembering her. R. Leo didn't speak. He just placed the box in his lap, closed his eyes, and smiled as the song played. And in that moment, with the sun hitting his hair and the music echoing softly through our kitchen, I realized something simple and earth-shaking. My son had reached a place in my father that I thought was long dead. He didn't ask for revenge. He didn't ask for justice. He offered connection. And somehow, that tiny gift had echoed louder than any punishment ever could. Later that night, after Leo had fallen asleep with the music box still playing beside him, I sat alone in the kitchen, holding a cup of lukewarm tea. The soft melody had looped so many times it should have faded into background noise, but instead, it lingered, like a memory refusing to let go. I reached into the drawer where I kept letters and forgotten things and pulled out the envelope that had arrived earlier that day. No return address, just my name written in the same shaky hand. Inside were 3 short lines. I was wrong about you. He's a good kid. I hope you're doing okay. No signature. But I didn't need one. I stared at those words for a long time. Not because they fixed everything, but because for the first time in years, my father had acknowledged that maybe, he hadn't seen me clearly at all. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was something. And in our family, where silence had always shouted louder than any words, those 3 sentences felt like an earthquake. I folded the letter gently and placed it in the back of Leo's sketchbook, between his drawing of the park and the silly doodle of our cat wearing sunglasses. The next morning, Leo held up the music box and asked, "Do you think Grandpa liked my drawing?" I smiled. "I think he did." Leo nodded, satisfied. "I hope he keeps it forever." I told him I drew Grandma smiling. He looked up at me. "Do you think he remembers what that looked like?" I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I think you helped him remember," I whispered. "I really do." And somehow, I knew that was true. A week later, I found the music box sitting in a new spot, right beside Leo's bed, next to his flashlight and stack of bedtime books. He'd started winding it every night before sleep, letting the soft notes fill the room while he hummed along, sometimes off-key, always sincere. It had become his ritual. Not for comfort, but for remembrance. One evening, as I tucked him in, he looked at me with that quiet seriousness kids get when they've been holding in a big thought. "Mom," he said, "do you think people can change when they're old? Like, really old?" I sat down beside him. "Sometimes. If they really want to." Leo nodded, like that answer would have to do for now. Then he added, "I think Grandpa was just really sad. Like, maybe he forgot how to be nice. But I think Grandma used to make him nicer." I saw it in the picture I drew. He reached over to wind the music box again. "So maybe if I remind him of her enough, he'll remember who he was when she was still here." I didn't have the words to respond. Only tears pressing behind my eyes and a heart swelling with pride I couldn't quite hold. Leo wasn't just kind, he was courageous in a way most adults never learn to be. He hadn't tried to hurt back. He hadn't yelled or walked away. He had offered love to someone who hadn't earned it, not yet. And somehow, that simple act had shaken a man who had never been moved by anyone. The music began to play again. As I turned out the lights, Leo whispered into the darkness, "Good night, Grandpa." And for the first time in years, I found myself whispering it back. Not because he deserved it yet. But because maybe, just maybe, we were all learning how to begin again. Weeks passed, and life settled into something gentle and slow, like exhaling after holding your breath for too many years. Leo returned to school, brighter somehow. His teacher sent a note home saying he'd shared the story of the music box with the class. Not just the object, but the feeling. She wrote, "Leo doesn't speak loudly, but when he talks, the room listens." Every Thursday, like clockwork, a white envelope would appear in our mailbox. No return address. Just a few uneven lines in that same familiar hand. One read, "She would have liked the music box finding its way to him." Another, "I didn't know he could draw like that." And then, "Tell him the drawing's still on my desk." They weren't apologies. Not in the way people expect them, no confessions, no grand statements. But each line chipped away at the old silence like sunlight softening ice. Leo would ask, "Is there a letter today?" And I'd nod, handing it over like it was treasure. He never rushed to open them. He read slowly, quietly. Then folded them back just as carefully and slipped them into a shoebox he'd labeled "Letters from Grandpa, real ones." One morning, Leo left a note of his own in the mailbox. I found out only because he told me later, casually, like it wasn't the bravest thing he'd done all month. It said, "I think she would have been proud of you, too." That night, he asked, "Do you think people can get better at loving, even if they started too late?" I brushed the hair from his forehead. "I think they can try. And sometimes, trying is enough to begin again." He nodded, satisfied. "Then I'll keep drawing." And with that, he turned over and fell asleep, his small hand resting on top of the music box, still closed, still playing in his dreams. The following weekend, as golden leaves danced down our quiet street, Leo asked if we could visit the cemetery. It wasn't out of sadness. His voice was calm, clear, like he'd already decided something important and simply needed me to follow. We packed a small bag, a thermos of cocoa, a folded blanket, his sketchbook, and the music box. He didn't say much during the drive. Just stared out the window, humming faintly. When we arrived, he walked ahead with purpose, weaving between the headstones like he knew exactly where he was going. I hadn't been to my mother's grave in years. When we reached it, Leo knelt without hesitation. He took the music box from his backpack, wound it gently, and set it at the base of the stone. "I wanted her to hear it," he said. I watched in silence as the soft melody filled the cool autumn air. Then, Leo opened his sketchbook and pulled out a new drawing, this one more detailed than the last. It showed a man sitting on a porch with a small boy beside him. Between them, a music box. And above them, a woman in the sky, smiling down. He placed it next to the flowers already there, anchoring it with a small stone. Then he stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I think she would like that," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "I think she'd love it." Leo reached for my hand as we walked back to the car. "Do you think he'll come here someday?" "Maybe," I said. "And if he does, she'll already know." That night, after Leo went to bed, I found another envelope in the mailbox. This one was thicker than usual. Inside was a photograph, old and fading, of my mother laughing mid-sentence, eyes crinkled, hand on my father's shoulder. On the back, written in his uneven hand, "She was always the heart of everything. Thank you for reminding me, Dad." And just below that, another line, barely legible. "Tell Leo." I heard it. A few months later, winter crept in quietly. The holidays arrived with their usual bittersweet weight, old memories pressing against new beginnings. But something had shifted in our house. The air felt lighter. Softer. Like healing had finally taken root somewhere deep and quiet. One evening, as snow tapped gently against the windows, Leo came into the living room holding the shoebox of letters. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas, the ones getting a little too short at the ankles, and his hair stuck up from sleep. "Can we read them again?" he asked. We sat together on the couch, the two of us wrapped in a knitted blanket, the music box playing its now familiar tune on the coffee table. Leo took out each letter carefully, one by one, reading them aloud in his small steady voice. After each note, he'd pause and nod, as if acknowledging something bigger than either of us could name. When we reached the last one, the one with the photograph, he traced the smiling woman with his finger. "Do you think Grandpa's different now?" he asked. I thought for a moment. Maybe not completely. But I think he's remembering who he used to be. And sometimes that's the first step. Leo rested his head on my shoulder. I'm glad I gave him a gift. Even if his was empty. I kissed the top of his head. Yours was never empty, sweetheart. It was the kind of gift that fills something people didn't even know was missing. That night, I wrote my own letter. It was short. Honest. You were cruel to me. But you were also once someone I looked up to. I don't know if we can ever go back. But for Leo's sake, I'm grateful you found a way to open a door again. I didn't mail it. I didn't need to. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's just about letting the pain stop echoing. The next morning, Leo came downstairs holding a new drawing. It was of a large heart, stitched together down the middle. Inside, two stick figures stood, one small, one tall, both holding a music box between them. Underneath, he'd written in big bold letters, "Gifts don't have to be things. Sometimes they're second chances." I didn't say anything. Just smiled, tears stinging my eyes. And in that moment, with snow falling softly outside and Leo dancing to the tune only he could fully hear, I knew this chapter had closed, not with a grand ending, but with something far more rare. Peace. Spring arrived quietly that year, the kind of spring that didn't announce itself with fanfare but whispered through budding branches and soft sunrises. Life didn't suddenly become extraordinary, it just became livable in the most beautiful way. Leo had grown taller. His drawings had, too. He'd moved on from stick figures to full scenes now, gardens, people laughing, hands reaching for each other. Every so often, a small music box would appear somewhere in his sketches. Always in the corner, never the focus. Like a quiet signature only he understood. One day after school, he came bursting through the door, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Mom. They're having a community art show. Ms. Riley said I can submit something." I smiled. "That's wonderful, honey. What will you draw?" He paused. "Not draw. I want to tell a story. With pictures and words. About gifts." And that's exactly what he did. 3 weeks later, his piece hung in the front hall of the library, a series of panels showing a boy giving drawings to people who looked tired, closed off, angry. Over time, their shoulders softened. Their hands opened. Their eyes changed. At the center, one image stood out, a boy placing a tiny music box into the hand of a man sitting alone. Above the scene, Leo had written, "Some gifts aren't wrapped. Some gifts don't make sense at first. But the best ones? The best ones remind people how to feel again." Visitors stopped to read it. Some smiled. Some cried. A few simply stood there, hands in pockets, lost in thought. Later that evening, as we were packing up, Leo turned to me. "Do you think Grandpa would have come if he lived closer?" I nodded. "Maybe he already has, in his own way. He didn't ask for proof. He just smiled and looked satisfied." That night, Leo placed the music box back on his nightstand, wound at once, and whispered, "Good night, Grandma." "Good night, Grandpa." And somewhere, in the stillness, I believed someone heard him. Because the echo of love doesn't always return as thunder. Sometimes it comes back as a whisper in the dark. Sometimes, it comes back as a little boy's voice, soft, steady, and full of light. A year later, almost to the day, Leo and I found ourselves sitting on the back porch, sipping lemonade under a soft amber sky. The music box sat between us on the little table, its wooden edges worn now, but still solid, still singing. "I think she would have liked this part," Leo said, watching the tree sway. "Which part?" I asked. "All of it," he said. "The quiet. The peace. The way things feel now." He was right. So much had changed since that first long drive back to my parents' house. And yet, so much hadn't. Frank never became someone he wasn't. But he tried, in the small ways that mattered. Letters. A snow globe. The absence of bitterness. And in return, Leo gave him what no lecture or punishment ever could: forgiveness without condition. Hope without expectation. It was Leo who taught me that healing doesn't always come from answers, but from choosing to stay soft in a world that hardens people too easily. That night, I tucked him into bed. The music box played softly beside him, just like always. And he whispered, "I'm going to make more gifts like that when I grow up. But not just for people I know. For people who need it." I kissed his forehead. "You already do, sweetheart." As I turned off the light, I looked back once more. The boy who had once stood with an empty box in his hands now held the entire room in his heart. And me? I finally understood that the most powerful gifts aren't the ones you give or receive. They're the ones that change you. The kind that remind you who you are, who you were, and who you still have time to become. And that is the gift that never runs out.